We often mistake social conformity and professional business for high intelligence because it looks efficient and controlled on the surface. In reality, many behaviors we consider normal or even disciplined are actually sophisticated coping mechanisms for significant cognitive gaps. Psychology shows that high-functioning people can still struggle immensely with fluid reasoning and the mental flexibility required for deep problem solving. You might see these habits in your colleagues who never change their minds, friends who can't stand a moment of silence, or even in your own daily routines. Cognitive psychology calls this the intelligence illusion, a state where surface-level success and verbal fluency hide a lack of analytical depth and critical thought. These aren't just minor personality quirks. They are measurable signs of how the brain prioritizes shortcuts over the harder work of active synthesis. By identifying these patterns, we can finally distinguish between true wisdom and the simple, repetitive mental loops that keep us from actual growth. Research suggests that true intelligence is often found in the very habits we usually overlook or even judge as being inefficient. Today, we're breaking down 5 specific habits that point toward lower cognitive engagement and a lack of authentic intellectual processing. Understanding these signs is the essential first step toward developing a more resilient, analytical, and truly high-functioning mind. 1. The habit of speaking with absolute, unshakable certainty on complex topics where you have little to no actual experience. Psychology calls this the Dunning-Kruger Effect, a cognitive bias where people with low ability at a task overestimate their own competence. This occurs because the very skills required to be competent are the exact same skills needed to recognize that you are making mistakes. Without metacognition, or the ability to think about your own thinking, you effectively become blind to your own intellectual gaps and limitations. While this bravado may look like natural confidence to an untrained observer, it is actually a primary sign of limited cognitive depth and processing. Research suggests that truly intelligent individuals are often more hesitant, more nuanced, and much more aware of their own vast limitations. In real-life scenarios, this habit leads to poor high-stakes decision-making and a consistent refusal to listen to expert advice or factual data. The long-term consequence is a stagnant mind that is fundamentally unable to learn from its errors or adapt to a changing reality. Following this, we find the second major habit, avoiding the admission of ignorance or the basic use of the phrase, "I don't know." Cognitive psychology suggests that intellectual humility, the recognition that your knowledge is limited, is a primary indicator of high fluid intelligence. When someone refuses to admit they lack specific information, they effectively close off their mental capacity for any future learning or growth. This habit often stems from a fragile ego that prioritizes perceived social status over the actual accuracy of the information being shared. In contrast, highly intelligent people view not knowing as an exciting opportunity for investigation and discovery rather than a personal failure. Psychology shows that those who embrace uncertainty are significantly better at processing complex, multi-layered data sets and adapting to new environments. The real-life consequence of constantly faking knowledge is a gradual, inevitable loss of trust from peers, colleagues, and family members. True cognitive growth requires the bravery to recognize and state exactly where your current understanding of the world ends. 2. An inability to sit in silence or solitude for more than a few minutes without reaching for a phone or digital distraction. Cognitive psychology suggests this constant need for external stimulation often signals a very low level of cognitive reflection. When the mind is understimulated, it begins to feel a sense of profound discomfort, restlessness, or even acute anxiety. Higher intelligence is strongly linked to what researchers call the need for cognition, or the intrinsic joy found in thinking deeply. If you cannot tolerate boredom, you likely lack the internal cognitive resources to process complex ideas independently from your environment. Research suggests that people who require constant input struggle significantly with original problem-solving and creative synthesis in their work. The real-life consequence is a shallow understanding of the world, usually filtered through other people's opinions and digital noise. Ultimately, a mind that cannot entertain or soothe itself becomes a permanent slave to its immediate surroundings. This leads us to the fourth habit, a fundamental failure to engage the brain's default mode network for internal processing. Cognitive psychology shows that the default mode network is active when we are not focused on the outside world, but on our own thoughts. In highly intelligent people, this network helps with deep self-reflection, memory consolidation, and long-term future planning. Individuals with lower cognitive engagement often find this internal state taxing, boring, or even frightening to navigate. They prioritize external resource allocation, meaning they only engage in thinking when an outside task specifically demands it. Research suggests this leads to a persistent lack of mental clarity and a reduced ability to synthesize new information creatively. The long-term consequence is a mind that primarily reacts to the world rather than truly understanding or shaping it. Without this internal dialogue, personal values and long-term life goals often become neglected or forgotten entirely. 3. Following strict rules, procedures, or daily routines even when they no longer make logical or practical sense. Psychology shows that high intelligence is largely defined by cognitive flexibility, or the ability to switch strategies based on context. When someone clings to a rule despite changing circumstances, it often indicates a very low mental processing capacity. Cognitive psychology calls this a mental set, where the brain becomes stuck using old solutions for entirely new problems. This habit is frequently disguised in society as being highly disciplined or having a very strong traditional work ethic. However, true discipline involves constant reevaluation of efficiency, not just blind obedience to a preset schedule. The real-life consequence is a total inability to innovate or handle unexpected crises effectively when they occur. Research suggests that rigid thinkers are the most likely to be replaced by simple automated systems in the modern economy. A closely related pattern involves struggling to solve simple problems because you can only see things for their most common intended use. Cognitive psychology calls this functional fixedness, a mental block that severely limits how we perceive objects in social systems. Research suggests that fluid intelligence relies heavily on the ability to break these rigid and boring mental associations. When you can only ever use a tool or a concept in one specific way, you are demonstrating a lack of creative synthesis. Psychology shows that this mental rigidity often extends into how individuals handle complex social and professional challenges. Instead of looking for a new path, the low-intelligence habit is to force a failing method until it eventually breaks. The real-life consequence is a high level of stress and frustration when faced with any situation that lacks a clear manual. Highly intelligent minds bypass this stress by viewing the entire world as a collection of adaptable, modular components. 4. Prioritizing the desperate need to win, an argument over the honest pursuit of objective, factual truth. Psychology shows that lower cognitive ability is often linked to a disproportionately high drive for social dominance and ego protection. In these heated moments, the brain treats a simple difference of opinion as a direct, physical threat to its status. Research suggests that truly intelligent people prioritize accuracy and are always willing to update their views when presented with data. When the ego demands a win, the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic, shuts down in favor of primitive emotional reactivity. This chemical shift prevents the individual from considering nuance or finding a creative, collaborative middle ground in a dispute. The real-life consequence is a consistent pattern of toxic relationships and a growing reputation for being unreasonable or stubborn. Simply put, a mind that cannot bear to be wrong is a mind that has finished its journey of growing. A hallmark of limited cognitive capacity is the persistent tendency to view the entire world in strictly binary, black and white terms. Psychology calls this splitting, a mental shortcut where people categorize everything as either purely good or purely bad. Holding two opposing ideas in the mind simultaneously requires significant cognitive energy and a high-functioning working memory. When processing power is low, the brain simplifies complex reality into either-or scenarios just to save its precious energy. Research suggests that high intelligence is directly correlated with the ability to tolerate high levels of ambiguity and nuance. If you find yourself constantly labeling people or political situations as all right or all wrong, you are likely oversimplifying reality. The real-life consequence is an inability to navigate complex social dynamics or solve multifaceted problems that have no easy answers. Intellectual depth is almost always found in the gray areas where simple, prepackaged answers do not exist. 5. Relying heavily on popular clichés, buzzwords, and viral catchphrases to express your own thoughts or emotions. Cognitive psychology suggests that linguistic variety and original phrasing are direct markers of high-level cognitive processing. When we use prepackaged thoughts, we are essentially outsourcing our analytical work to the collective social consciousness. Research shows that this habit signals a lack of active synthesis, where the brain fails to build its own unique understanding of a situation. It's easy to repeat what everyone else is saying, but it requires significant effort to articulate a nuanced personal perspective. Psychology calls this cognitive mimicry, a survival strategy used to blend in when the internal mental work feels too difficult. The real-life consequence is a total loss of individuality and the inability to offer any value in creative or critical discussions. True intelligence is found in the struggle to find the right words for a unique, personal truth. All 5 of these normal habits collectively describe a psychological state known as being a cognitive miser. This isn't necessarily a sign of permanent low capacity, but rather a persistent choice to take the path of least resistance. When the brain becomes mentally lazy, it relies on biases, clichés, and routines to avoid the high-calorie cost of deep thinking. Research suggests that intellectual potential is often wasted simply because these mental shortcuts feel more comfortable in the short term. Over time, these habits become hardwired into the neural architecture, making it increasingly difficult to think critically or creatively. The psychological cost is a gradual narrowing of one's world, where new ideas are seen as threats rather than opportunities. By consistently choosing the easy thought over the accurate one, we slowly degrade our own cognitive resilience and adaptability. Recognizing this miserly behavior in ourselves is the only way to break the cycle and re-engage our full intellectual power. None of these habits are permanent defects, but they are vital warnings that your mind is operating on autopilot. The incredible reality of neuroplasticity means that you can always choose to strengthen your cognitive flexibility and analytical depth. By intentionally practicing intellectual humility and leaning into the discomfort of silence, you begin to rewire your brain for higher intelligence. It takes courage to admit ignorance and effort to see the world in shades of gray, but the rewards are a more resilient and capable mind. Intelligence is not a fixed number or a final destination. It is a dynamic set of habits that we choose to cultivate every single day. When you stop reacting to the world with prepackaged thoughts, you finally start living with your own authentic intellectual power. Notice which of these habits you see in your own life today, not to judge yourself, but to find the starting point for your next level of growth. The path to a sharper mind begins the moment you decide to stop settling for the easiest possible thought. Thank you for watching.